Imagine sitting in the Oval Office looking at a map of the world. Not the colorful classroom version, but the kind filled with flight paths, radar coverage, and warning times. Advisors are not talking about speeches or elections. They are talking about minutes. Minutes before a missile appears on radar. Minutes before supply chains break. Minutes before trade routes shift. Now imagine realizing that one frozen island quietly affects all three. This is not a real estate story. It is an Arctic power story. In 1946, historical records show that the United States explored a formal proposal to acquire Greenland, structured around gold rather than currency. The idea was not symbolic. It was strategic. Decades later, the idea never disappeared. It resurfaced whenever pressure built across the global system. Why does the same question keep returning across generations? What does Washington see on the ice that the rest of the world keeps overlooking? And while powerful states redraw strategic plans as the Arctic warms, the people living there are facing a very different reality, far from the maps and meeting rooms. To understand why Greenland keeps coming back, the story has to move beyond headlines. What matters is not the joke, but the system beneath it. Once the imagination fades, the real question remains. Why has Greenland mattered for so long, across administrations, technologies, and eras? When people hear the phrase buying Greenland, it often sounds like a relic from another time, a moment when powerful states expanded simply by drawing new lines on maps. But that framing misunderstands what is actually at stake. Greenland is not being valued as land. It is being evaluated as a system. In modern geopolitics, territory matters less than what territory allows a country to control. Reaction time, supply chains, trade corridors. Greenland sits at the intersection of all three, quietly linking military security, industrial resilience, and future commerce. From a strategic standpoint, Greenland connects North America and Europe through the polar region. Aircraft trajectories, missile paths, and satellite coverage follow the curvature of the Earth, not the straight lines seen on classroom maps. When those paths are considered, the Arctic shifts from the periphery to the center of strategic planning. This shift is not new. What is new is the environment around it. As polar ice thins, areas once dismissed as inaccessible are becoming operational during seasonal windows. Routes that existed only in planning documents or academic models are beginning to carry real economic weight. Infrastructure that once served narrow security purposes now overlaps with commercial interests. At the same time, the structure of the global economy has changed. Modern industries depend on complex supply chains built around specialized materials, long-distance logistics, and just-in-time delivery. Disruptions no longer remain local. A bottleneck in one region can ripple across multiple sectors within weeks. Greenland enters this picture not as the cause of these changes, but as a pressure point shaped by them. Its importance rises not because the island itself has changed, but because the systems surrounding it have. Seen this way, recurring interest in Greenland is not emotional or ideological. It is procedural. When warning time shrinks, supply chains tighten, and trade routes shift, places that sit at the intersection of those forces gain value. This explains why Greenland repeatedly returns to strategic discussions whenever global conditions become less stable, not because leaders suddenly develop new ambitions, but because long-standing incentives resurface under new circumstances. Understanding Greenland as a system rather than a symbol clarifies the path forward. The issue is not whether Greenland matters. The issue is why it matters now. And answering that question requires looking at the deeper forces that have shaped this fixation for more than a century. The idea of acquiring Greenland did not originate in modern politics or recent headlines. It emerged during a period when the United States was still learning how geography could be translated into long-term power. In the year 1867, the United States completed the purchase of Alaska from the Russian Empire. At the time, the decision was widely criticized as wasteful and unnecessary. Yet over the following decades, Alaska revealed immense strategic and economic value, reshaping how policymakers thought about territory. That lesson extended beyond Alaska itself. Historical records indicate that in the same period, American officials examined the strategic value of other northern territories, including Greenland and Iceland. The reasoning was direct and unsentimental. Control of key positions in the North Atlantic would shape access between Europe and North America. In an era when maritime and later aerial routes defined power, geography offered leverage long before conflict began. Domestic priorities eventually pushed these discussions aside. The United States turned inward, focused on reconstruction, industrial growth, and continental development. But the underlying assessment did not disappear. It remained dormant. It resurfaced dramatically after the Second World War. Europe emerged fractured and economically exhausted. A new rivalry between Washington and Moscow began to define global politics. Military planners recognized that future conflicts would not resemble past wars. Long-range aircraft and emerging missile technologies shifted the battlefield into the air and across polar routes. In 1946, the United States explored a formal proposal to acquire Greenland from Denmark. Contemporary accounts describe an offer structured around gold rather than currency instruments, reflecting how strategically significant the island was considered at the time. Military assessments emphasized Greenland's role as a forward position for detection and interception across the polar region. Denmark declined the proposal. The decision was clear. Greenland was not for sale. What followed is more revealing than the offer itself. Rather than disengaging, the United States adjusted its approach. In 1951, a defense agreement granted American forces long-term access to Greenland for military purposes. Airfields, radar installations, and logistical support became embedded into the island's infrastructure. Sovereignty remained unchanged, but strategic access was secured. This pattern would repeat across decades. Periods of lower tension reduced attention. Periods of heightened rivalry brought Greenland back into focus. The interest was never framed as ambition. It was framed as necessity. This history points to a consistent dynamic. Greenland mattered not because of ideology or leadership preferences, but because its position repeatedly solved the same strategic problem under different technological conditions. When incentives remain constant, interest does not fade. It waits. And as global systems evolved, those incentives did not weaken. They intensified. To understand why that happened, history alone is not enough. The answer lies in how geography itself became a weapon. In the modern era, geography no longer determines power through size or distance alone. It determines power through time. Minutes of warning, seconds of detection. The margin between awareness and surprise has become one of the most valuable assets in global security. Greenland occupies a position where time can be gained or lost before any decision is made. On traditional maps, the island appears remote and detached from the centers of power, but military planners do not rely on flat representations. They model trajectories, flight paths, and sensor coverage that follow the curvature of the Earth. When those models are applied, Greenland moves from the edge of the map to the center of strategic calculation. Aircraft, missiles, and long-range systems traveling between Eurasia and North America follow the shortest routes over the polar region. This has been understood since the early days of strategic aviation. Greenland sits along that corridor. From this position, detection systems can identify potential threats earlier than they could from mainland locations further south. In the missile age, early warning does not guarantee safety, but it creates options. Additional minutes allow defensive systems to activate, communication channels to open, and leadership to respond with clarity rather than haste. Geography, in this context, does not prevent conflict. It reduces uncertainty. This is why Greenland is often described as an unsinkable platform. Unlike mobile assets, it cannot be quietly repositioned or removed. Infrastructure built there remains anchored in place. Radar arrays, surveillance systems, and support facilities gain permanence simply by existing on solid ground. As military technology advanced, this permanence became more valuable rather than less. Detection windows narrowed as systems became faster and quieter. The tolerance for delay diminished. Greenland's role as a forward point of awareness grew accordingly. At the same time, changes in the Arctic environment introduced a second layer of significance. As seasonal ice coverage declined, routes once considered impractical began to open intermittently. Shipping corridors connecting Asia and Europe through northern waters started to attract commercial attention. Even limited seasonal access altered calculations made around fuel use, transit time, and logistical planning. Each day removed from a long-distance shipping route reduces costs across multiple dimensions. fuel consumption declines, insurance exposure shifts, scheduling becomes more flexible. Over time, these adjustments reshape trade flows and competitive positioning. Greenland does not control these routes, but it influences the infrastructure that makes them viable. Ports, navigation support, refueling capacity, and emergency response facilities determine whether Arctic shipping remains experimental or becomes reliable. Control over infrastructure quietly shapes access. This convergence of military and commercial interests is central to Greenland's strategic value. Early warning systems and shipping lanes occupy the same geography. Reaction time and delivery time are governed by the same physical realities. Greenland became important not because war and trade merged, but because the space separating them disappeared. This dynamic has played out before. During the Cold War, the United States constructed facilities beneath the Greenland ice sheet under the premise of scientific research. One such installation became known as Camp Century. Beneath the surface, engineers built tunnels, living quarters, and supporting systems powered by a portable nuclear reactor. Publicly, the project was framed as an experiment in Arctic construction. Internally, it supported a more ambitious concept. Military planners examined whether the ice could host mobile missile infrastructure that would be difficult to detect or target. The idea was bold. It was also technically flawed. The ice did not remain stable. Glacial movement deformed tunnels and stressed structures. Maintenance demands increased beyond practicality. Within a few years, the project was abandoned. The reactor was removed. Other materials were left sealed under the assumption that the ice would remain permanently frozen. That assumption is now uncertain. Researchers have since discussed the long-term risk that environmental changes could eventually expose remnants of Cold War activity once believed to be safely buried. What was hidden by distance and ice is no longer guaranteed to remain so. The lesson of Camp Century is not simply historical. It illustrates how Greenland has repeatedly been treated as a space where risks could be absorbed quietly, far from public scrutiny. Geography provided cover for decisions that would have drawn opposition elsewhere. Today, that cover is thinning. Greenland is no longer a silent buffer at the edge of the world. It has become a visible intersection of military urgency, commercial ambition, and environmental consequence. Geography has turned it into a strategic instrument, not through aggression, but through position. Yet position alone does not determine outcomes. What ultimately reshapes power is not where a place sits on the map, but what lies beneath its surface and how that value is developed. That realization shifts the story from distance and detection to resources and dependency. In earlier eras, strategic resources were visible and familiar. Oil fields, coal mines, steel production. Control over these assets shaped industrial power and military capacity. In the 21st century, the foundations of power have become smaller, more complex, and harder to replace. Rare earth elements sit at the center of this shift. Despite their name, rare earths are not scarce in absolute terms. They exist in many parts of the world. What makes them strategically sensitive is the difficulty of separating and refining them into usable form. The process is expensive, environmentally damaging, and technically demanding. For decades, most advanced economies chose not to build this capacity. One country made a different choice. Over time, China invested heavily in refining infrastructure, absorbing costs and environmental impact that others avoided. As a result, it developed a dominant position in processing capacity. Even when rare earths are mined outside its borders, they are often sent there for refinement before entering global supply chains. This created a structural dependency. Modern economies rely on rare earths in ways that are difficult to substitute. Electric motors, renewable energy systems, advanced electronics, radar, and precision-guided defense platforms all depend on components that require these materials. The issue is not short-term scarcity, but long-term vulnerability. From this perspective, access to new deposits matters less than control over the processing chain. Greenland enters the picture as one of the few locations with the potential to alter that balance over time. Geological surveys have identified significant rare earth deposits beneath parts of the island. Among them is the site commonly referred to as Kvanefjeld, often cited as one of the larger undeveloped deposits outside Asia. For policymakers, the appeal is not immediate extraction or profit. It is optionality. Diversifying supply reduces exposure. It provides leverage during negotiation, It allows systems to absorb shocks without cascading failure, but this only holds if new sources are developed alongside new processing capacity. This is where the mineral story becomes more complicated. Mining creates options. Refining creates power. Extracting rare earths without independent refining does not weaken existing dependencies. It reinforces them. New mines that feed the same bottlenecks change geography without changing outcomes. Building alternative processing capacity requires sustained capital, regulatory tolerance, and political commitment over many years. It also requires confronting environmental trade-offs that have been outsourced for decades. These constraints explain why diversification has progressed slowly despite widespread recognition of the risk. They also explain why foreign investment in Greenland's mining sector has drawn attention. Influence over project financing, development timelines, and export pathways can shape outcomes without requiring formal control. Minority stakes and long-term contracts often matter more than ownership labels. In this sense, Greenland is not simply a mineral prize. It is a test of whether industrial resilience can be rebuilt after years of dependence. The strategic concern is not that Greenland will dramatically shift the balance of power overnight. It is that without deliberate coordination, it will fail to change it at all. A new mine that feeds an old system does not create independence. It deepens reliance. This is the mineral trap. Avoiding it requires aligning geology with industrial policy and finance. Resources alone are not enough. How they are developed determines who benefits. That realization moves the story once again, away from what lies underground and toward how development is paid for. Because in the end, minerals follow money, and money shapes influence long before sovereignty changes hands. When territory cannot be acquired directly, influence is often built through finance. This dynamic sits at the center of Greenland's modern dilemma. Greenland today exercises broad control over its domestic affairs. It has its own parliament, its own language, and a political culture increasingly focused on self-determination. Support for independence exists in principle across much of the population, yet independence in practice confronts a financial constraint that cannot be ignored. Each year, Denmark provides Greenland with a substantial block grant that supports more than half of public spending. This funding underwrites hospitals, schools, transportation, energy systems, and basic government services. Without it, the economy would face immediate contraction and difficult trade-offs. This creates a structural tension. Greenland can pursue greater sovereignty, or it can preserve economic stability. At present, sustaining both simultaneously remains difficult. That tension creates space for external influence. If Greenland were to move toward independence, the Danish subsidy would likely diminish over time. A newly sovereign government would need replacement funding quickly to avoid austerity and social disruption. In that moment, whoever offers capital, investment, and long-term support becomes the most influential partner in the country. This mechanism does not rely on coercion. It relies on necessity. Large infrastructure projects require substantial upfront financing. Ports, airports, communications networks, and energy facilities take years to complete and decades to repay. Small economies rarely finance them alone. They depend on partners willing to absorb early risk in exchange for long-term access or preferential terms. Greenland fits this pattern closely. From an economic perspective, Greenland resembles a young nation with valuable assets but limited cash flow. Its long-term potential is real. Its short-term fiscal capacity is constrained. In such environments, the structure of financing often matters more than formal ownership. Loans introduce obligations. Equity introduces influence. Infrastructure introduces dependencies that persist long after political cycles change. This is why strategic competition around Greenland increasingly centers on investment rather than acquisition. Control is exercised not through flags or borders, but through contracts, repayment schedules, and operational access. The risk for Greenland is not immediate loss of sovereignty. It is gradual erosion of choice. Each individual agreement may appear practical. A port expansion, an airport upgrade, a mining partnership. Considered separately, none alters national direction. Considered together, they shape it. Once economic systems align around specific partners, alternatives become costly. Policy flexibility narrows. Decisions that once belonged to elected institutions become constrained by financial reality. This is how influence is accumulated without ever changing a map. For Greenland, the challenge is navigating development without repeating patterns of dependency shaped by distant priorities. For external actors, the challenge is recognizing that influence gained through finance carries responsibility as well as leverage. When multiple powers compete to fund the same future, outcomes rarely remain local. They ripple outward through alliances, supply chains, and security arrangements far beyond the Arctic. At that point, Greenland ceases to be a peripheral issue. It becomes a test case, a test of how power operates in an era where territory is rarely taken by force, but sovereignty can still be shaped by balance sheets. What is unfolding around Greenland is not a dispute between two governments. It reflects a broader shift in how power is exercised when geography, finance, and security begin to move at the same time. Each major actor approaches Greenland from a different position. The consequences emerge where those approaches intersect. For the United States, Greenland is primarily a security asset. Its value is measured in early detection, defensive depth, and continuity of access. American strategy emphasizes stability rather than transformation. The objective is to preserve reaction time and situational awareness over decades. This is why radar systems, long-term access agreements, and quiet infrastructure upgrades matter more than visible economic development. Europe approaches Greenland through governance and responsibility. Denmark frames the relationship in legal and social terms shaped by history. European institutions prioritize consultation, process, and gradual change. This approach offers legitimacy, but it often moves slowly. Strategic urgency can outpace bureaucratic capacity. When infrastructure decisions stall, outside actors rarely wait. China approaches the Arctic through integration rather than ownership. Infrastructure financing, logistics access, and long-term commercial participation sit at the center of its strategy. A port expansion or an airport upgrade is not treated as a standalone project. It becomes part of a network that links shipping routes, resource flows, and industrial supply chains. Influence accumulates quietly through participation rather than declaration. Russia treats the Arctic as an operational domain. Along its northern coastline, shipping routes are regulated, supported, and monetized. Icebreakers, ports, and security presence are integrated into national planning. For Moscow, the Arctic is not a future opportunity. It is already a functioning system that generates both leverage and revenue. Greenland stands adjacent to all of these strategies without fully aligning with any of them. The economic consequences extend far beyond the island itself. As Arctic routes become more reliable during seasonal windows, traditional shipping corridors face gradual pressure. Transit times shift, fuel usage changes, insurance calculations adjust. In summer months, a single cargo vessel navigating Arctic waters can bypass weeks of travel through southern choke points, altering the economics of an entire shipment before it reaches port. These changes ripple outward. Manufacturing decisions respond to transport costs. Energy markets adjust logistics. Ports that once anchored global trade begin to lose relative importance, while new hubs gain attention. Small shifts near the Arctic reshape decisions thousands of kilometers away. Security consequences follow closely. Alliance cohesion becomes harder to maintain when members perceive risk differently. An airfield upgrade viewed as civilian infrastructure by one actor may be interpreted as strategic positioning by another. When intentions are unclear, trust erodes without announcement. Governance structures struggle to keep pace. Many Arctic agreements were designed for an environment assumed to be permanently frozen. As conditions change, rules lag behind reality. In that gap, influence is exercised through practice rather than policy. For Greenland, the social consequences are immediate. Rapid external interest collides with a society already managing economic constraint, cultural transition, and historical trauma. Promises of development coexist with concern about dependency. Strategic attention does not automatically improve daily life. Behind every calculation of access or leverage, communities absorb the weight of distant decisions. Infrastructure reshapes not only trade routes, but routines, expectations, and identity. This is the hidden cost of becoming valuable. As competition intensifies, neutrality becomes harder to sustain. Delay does not preserve balance. It allows external incentives to shape outcomes by default. Greenland's future will not be decided by a single agreement or declaration. It will be shaped by cumulative choices made under pressure from competing systems. And once those systems harden, reversing course becomes expensive. That reality shifts the focus away from comparison and toward choice. Once neutrality disappears, every system must choose how to survive. After the reserve freeze, the global financial system did not search for a fix. It searched for workarounds. No major economy can fully exit the existing architecture without severe cost. No parallel system is mature enough to replace it outright. What has emerged instead is a spectrum of adaptive strategies, each shaped by trade-offs rather than ideals. The first path is consolidation. Some states choose to move closer to the financial core. They deepen alignment with jurisdictions that control settlement, custody, and liquidity. Reserves remain where markets are deepest and payment systems most reliable. This preserves access. It also formalizes dependence. For advanced economies with strong institutional ties, this approach still works. Capital remains cheaper, financial markets stay liquid. But strategic autonomy narrows. Financial safety becomes inseparable from political alignment. The second path is diversification. This is the most widely chosen response. Rather than betting on a single system, reserve managers spread exposure across currencies, custodians, and asset classes. Gold holdings increase not as a statement, but because gold carries no settlement risk. Bilateral trade agreements reduce reliance on global intermediaries. Payment routes multiply. Diversification does not remove vulnerability, it dilutes it. Efficiency is sacrificed for resilience. Returns decline modestly. Friction increases, but catastrophic loss becomes less likely. Insurance regains meaning, even if it becomes more expensive. The third path is insulation. Some states reduce exposure by tightening capital controls and localizing settlement. Domestic payment rails are strengthened. Trade flows are routed through controlled channels. The cost is growth. Capital becomes harder to attract. Innovation slows. Domestic inefficiencies compound. Insulation protects sovereignty but limits scale and integration. None of these paths is neutral. Consolidation trades autonomy for access. Diversification trades efficiency for resilience. Insulation trades growth for control. The most dangerous position is pretending no choice is required, because the old assumption has already been broken. The reserve freeze changed incentives across finance, energy, and trade. Once access can be withdrawn, systems must be designed to withstand interruption rather than assume continuity. This is why parallel settlement systems continue to expand, why supply chains remain shorter and more regional, why reserve management now considers custody and jurisdiction alongside liquidity and yield. The system will continue to operate, but it will operate under different rules. Speed gives way to redundancy. Certainty gives way to optionality. Over time, this reshapes growth, inflation, and living standards, not through collapse, but through the accumulation of small frictions that never fully disappear. The final question is no longer how the system works. It is who ultimately absorbs the cost of making it safer. Greenland is often described as empty space at the edge of the world. In reality, it is one of the clearest examples of how power operates in the modern era. Its importance does not come from size or population. It comes from position. Greenland compresses reaction time. It influences supply chains. It sits beside trade routes that are only now becoming viable. It links security, industry, and commerce in ways few places can. Yet Greenland is not just a strategic system, it is a society. While governments calculate warning minutes and shipping days, communities on the ice are managing economic uncertainty, cultural transition, and the long shadow of decisions made far away. Strategic value does not automatically translate into better lives. In many cases, it increases vulnerability before benefits arrive. This is the central tension of the story. The same forces that make Greenland valuable to powerful actors also place pressure on the people who live there. Capital moves faster than institutions. Attention grows faster than trust. Influence expands faster than accountability. History offers a simple lesson. Outcomes follow incentives. When incentives reward speed over stability, leverage over partnership, and short-term gain over long-term responsibility, the results are rarely balanced. They shape systems that are difficult to reverse. Greenland is not being bought in a single transaction. It is being priced over time through infrastructure, finance, and strategic necessity. Power today rarely announces itself with conquest. It arrives quietly through balance sheets. Empires do not conquer ice, they finance it. The future of Greenland will depend on whether those incentives are shaped deliberately or allowed to harden by default. That choice matters not only for a small Arctic society, but for a world learning how influence works when territory is no longer taken by force, yet sovereignty can still be reshaped. If you want to better understand how money, geography, and power interact far beyond daily headlines, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video. These stories do not remain distant forever. They always move closer.